Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Vibhuti Jain. I'm the Project Finance Advisor at Power Africa. I think many of you in the room are familiar with Power Africa. We're a US government-led energy investment initiative in sub-Saharan Africa. Just by way of brief background, we were launched about 3 years ago by President Obama during a state visit, and we have twin goals, both of which are very relevant for this current panel. The first is to increase electricity generation in sub-Saharan Africa by adding 30,000 megawatts of cleaner generation of capacity in the region, and the second is to increase energy access by adding 60 million new connections. I think for those in the room who are familiar with the agency, I don't want to get into the details about how we work, but basically this panel, in which we're going to hear from government officials as well as EPC contractors and developers on what their priorities are and what they're excited about seeing the private sector assist with as they think about their long-term goals. I think one of the reasons why that's so relevant for Power Africa is we're essentially a consortium of 12 different US government agencies, ranging from our US government DFI, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, to our ECA, EXIM, to the Department of Energy, to USAID, where my office is headquartered, as well as several others. And we also are comprised of many multilateral partners like the AFDB, the World Bank Group, including the IFC, and various African and European governments. And finally, we have over 120 private sector partners. And what we're trying to do is create a consortium where we can leverage the different expertise and competitive advantages of each of our members to help push projects across the finish line and reach financial close. So listening to our panelists today will help inform our resource allocation decisions and our own priorities, and hopefully it will help those in the audience as well. So I know that one of our panelists is actually on a very tight deadline, and I do not want him to miss his flight. So I'm going to direct my first question at Webster Mfebe of the South African Forum of Civil Engineering Contractors. Webster, you represent the largest industry of contractors and construction businesses on the continent. It's often suggested that contractors and developers are reluctant to invest their expertise, resources, and innovations into developing major government-led projects due to a lack of certainty around the financial risks associated with tender processes and the like. What approaches and recommendations would you propose that will crowd in private sector investment and contractors and developers, and more freely in the development phase of major public sector projects to alleviate budgetary demands of governments?
Thank you very much. Firstly, just to put context into my inputs, SAFSEC, the South African Forum of Civil Engineering Contractors, agrees with the view of the leaders of the AU and the leaders of the South African government that infrastructure development should not only leave behind physical infrastructure, but should also contribute to national developmental goals, to economic growth, to job creation, to skills development. And that is what shapes our thinking in whatever we do. Of course, the issues of reluctance on investment of expertise, resources, and innovation. There are a number of factors currently influencing the domestic construction sector's confidence to invest expertise, resources, and innovation. A lack of work in the domestic construction sector, delays in infrastructure expenditure, a particularly low profitability in the industry, poor tendering environment, tough labor negotiations, lack of prompt payments for work completed by contractors. Some of these factors influence the decisions of many contractors to expand into Africa and elsewhere. And if that situation maintains, we run a risk similar to other African countries where the domestic construction capacity of the industry is dissipated, and foreigners, nothing wrong with foreigners, they come and do the work that is supposed to be done by the construction industry. The lack of certainty is not only about the lack or delay of expenditure in government infrastructure, but also speak to questions of lack of alignment between tenders put out and actual tenders awarded. 2015, for an example, saw a 40% decline in the conversion ratio, that is, tenders that have been converted to actual projects. And you can imagine that 40% is very huge. Contractors go an extra mile to put all their resources to prepare for these tenders. And it also not only robs the contractors, but also the bona fide suppliers to the industry if that is not taken into consideration. However, there's a reason to be optimistic because the infrastructure programs that have been announced by the Minister of Finance in the recent budget, and also the successes such as the Energy Renewal Program, give confidence, and I must say to investors to come and invest in this country. Private sector involvement has ensured that we spend 194 billion rand in this renewable energy initiative. 27%, which represent 53.4 billion rands, is foreign direct investment, which shows that government alone cannot be able to deal with these factors. Included in that are actual challenges which call for external investment to join hands with government. For an example, if you look at the maintenance backlog without even considering what has to be done, if you look at the road network, for an example, in terms of the SANRAL September 2014 report, there is a poor road network of about 11,000 kilometers, which would need about 20 to 30 billion rands to deal with. If you look at energy, for an example, we are talking between 50 and 70 billion rands that you need to do the maintenance backlog. When you talk about water and sanitation, you're talking about a gap of 60 billion rand. Over a period of 10 years, you're talking about 600 billion rand. That calls for space for private sector participation to deal with those issues. And I'm saying that we have to be bullish about the outlook of our economy, especially Moody's forecast of 1.7 growth next year, and the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank 1.7 and IMF of 1.2% outlook in terms of growth. And therefore, if we work together and we deal with the problems of regulatory certainty, roll out the infrastructure, talk about delivery mechanisms of projects like build and design, lump sum, framework agreements to deliver projects in a manner that will involve the contractors. Our issue in South Africa, which we keep on talking about, is that contractors are involved at the later stage of the process of project delivery. We have agreed as a country to say that the way we look at project, we must look at it at infrastructure as a three-stage process: planning, implementation, and maintenance. You've heard I've talked about backlogs in maintenance. That was left out in the previous thinking, in the previous paradigm. So we need to look at these things as a continuum in order to deliver all these. That is my input so far, and I've indicated also I've got very serious flight problems, and I will remain here so far.
Thank you, Webster. Thank you for your commentary, and given that you have time constraints, before we go to the other panelists, does anyone have any specific questions for Webster that he can address before leaving?
And a commitment to invest, I would welcome.
Okay, with that, should we move? We can move on to the other panelists, and you should feel free to excuse yourself if you need to leave early. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
So moving on to our next panelist, we have Longe, who's the head of procurement and power from NBET, the Nigerian bulk electricity trading company. And Longe, I'd like to ask you, so there's been a lot of buzz about energy investment and energy needs in Nigeria. I'd like to hear from you what investment projects are coming up in Nigeria that you're seeking private sector developer participation and private sector financing in.
Thank you very much, Jane. Just to add to what the introduction that you gave, MBT is actually an off-taking company fully owned by government, where we buy powers from the generating company and we sell to the distribution company. Presently in Nigeria, we have the need for power. And as such, we've had many developers come to the country to develop their projects. As I see it here, we have developers that have gone into gas-related and also solar. Now, there are so many, but we have a way of trying to shift them to know which one are really more credible and serious. From the gas side, which is purely on the southern side of the country, we have about 5 very serious projects. I would say the first is there's the QIPP, which the Black Rhino Group is they are spearheading. That is a 540 megawatt plant. Also, we should understand that most of these projects that we have, they already have developers, and there's also the need maybe to have financiers into the deal, and it will be up to the different financiers to see how to reach out to them and discuss with them. But I cannot always provide this list to you. Apart from the QIPP, we have the Proton, which is also in the southern part, is about 150 megawatts. We have also there's an Oma power plant that is 500 megawatts in the southern eastern part of the country. We also have Century Power, is about 495 megawatts. Moving closer to the solar side, we have 15 very serious solar projects. I don't know if I should start calling the names one by one, but I just list some of these projects. We have the NSCP, Nigeria Solar Capital Partners. That is in Bauchi, 100 megawatt plant. We also have, there's a Pan-African solar in Katsina, is 75 megawatts. We have the middle band, which is 100 megawatts, is in Kogi State, in the middle belt of the country. We have the Nova Scotia, which is in Lokoja side, that is Jigawa side, that is 80 megawatts. We have Afri Niger, that is in Nasarawa, which is middle belt, and that is 50 megawatts. We have the Green Carries, 100 megawatts in Yobe State. There are so many, but after this section, anybody can meet me, I can actually share the list and the people to get across to. But just to add, with what we have now, we have a new minister, and his vision is to make sure we try to have the right means of power in the country. Rather than where you have a developer go to the north to want to develop a gas power plant, which does not really make sense trying to build pipeline from the south to the north. So the focus would be more to have power plant located in the areas that have the best resources. Like in the northern part of the country, we have more sunlight, so it's preferable to have more solars over them. While within the middle belt, we have good hydro and coal facilities, so it's preferable to have those kind of coal thermal and also hydro plant there. Then in the southern part where you have more of the gas, then we can have more of the gas power plants. This is really what we do. Like I said, after this section, somebody can meet me, I can share the list with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Longe. That was very informative. And I think one thing that we've heard throughout the day is really thinking about having a different energy mix as countries plan for adding capacity to their grid and to their national system. So that was very interesting. Moving on, next I'd like to ask Richard Fries, who is the Group CEO of GIB, an EPC contractor. And Richard, I'd like you to speak about some innovative mechanisms that GIB has adopted as a consultant for increasing its participation in private sector-led projects.
Thanks, Bhuputi. I'm glad you corrected that we are not an EPC. We've become a reluctant developer.
My apologies.
I've heard quite a few people in this room this morning all having become reluctant developers. So essentially, GIB is a traditional engineering company that was all up until about 2011. We have played in the role of consultant in all the various aspects of project finance and project delivery. So we cover water and sanitation, all aspects of transport, so that's airport, that's rail, as well as the traditional roads and toll concessioning. And we've covered many areas within the African continent. What we have found in the role that we have fulfilled, and we've covered basically those 5 areas where the traditional role of the consultant fits in. The first one being where we act as a traditional consultant to a client, where the project is fairly clearly defined, and we come in as an engineer and we assist the client to take out the project on a conventional construction role. But then we've also come in where we act as a transaction advisor for government, where we're part of a broader transaction advisory team, and we assist government in procuring either a concession or something of this nature. So this would include projects like the Gautrain project. We were part of the transaction advisory team, or the rolling stock procurement that PRASA has undertaken, the 123 billion rand program that they have undertaken. So in that area, we fulfill the role of a transaction advisor. We've also worked with project developers, where we play the traditional role either in the form of a turnkey, where we assist the developer in the role of an engineer. We've worked with the lender's technical advisor. We've been on that side, where we assist the lenders in providing oversight in some of their projects. From this experience that we had, and working particularly outside of South Africa, because our experience is that these private finance projects are more suitable for outside South Africa. So beyond the renewable program in the early days, the toll concessioning programs that took place, there's not really, the procurement environment in South Africa is not very ideal for private sector development in the projects. So we found an opportunity outside South Africa where we found that the need is always there. And as we heard this morning, there's a lot of interest from a financing point of view. But the problem is always bringing these two parties together. And a lot of it rests around the ability to define a project or take it to a stage where people have got some interest in a particular project. Now, typically, the financiers may stand back and wait for the project to reach a stage where they're comfortable, typically your BFS stage. But equally on the government side, they may identify the project and may have exhausted the typical DFI funding that is available out there. And we identify the opportunity to rather, instead of waiting for your traditional procurement process, but to go out on our own and start identifying these projects. So we end up with a list of project opportunities, and because we're a multidisciplinary engineering house, project management, and we've got some project financing expertise in-house, we're able to very quickly see whether a project has got legs, whether a project can run. And that saves a lot of trouble. We've heard throughout the course of the day, there's a lot of complexities involved with just defining that project. So we use our in-house abilities, if I could use the word, a matchbox calculation. We can very quickly do some numbers, whether it's a toll concession, whether it's an airport, to be able to say, this could work or it couldn't work. If we satisfy that there is the initial legs on the project, we then go through the process where we crowd in some of the development finance preparation funds that's out there. For example, in South Africa, we have the DTI, that can give you up to $1 million to assist to package a project. We will combine that with our own sweat equity and really start taking the project to the best that we can get to, closer to BFS, or if we're able to assist and bring all the funding together. It does become complicated at times. At which stage do you bring in the EPCs, the OEMs, etc., etc.? If you bring them in early, it assists to demonstrate the early capacity on who will be the role players to be able to deliver the project. If you bring them a little bit late in the project, you have the opportunity where you can go on a competitive process and get best value for money. So there's not a one-size-fits-all. We have to normally look at what is required in the project. So that is really the approach that we have taken. And I think it deals with the first question that you also asked to Webster in terms of what do we do to try and get some of these projects off the ground where public sector, we know the need is there, but they're unable to take it to the market. So this is one approach that we use.
Thank you, Richard. That was very helpful, and particularly as someone who's working in the development sector, I found that very enlightening, especially your comments on talking about how you take a multidisciplinary approach and you wear many different hats and you really try to focus on how to crowd in private capital and best leverage DFI capital. I think that's something that I'd be interested in hearing more about later on in this panel. So with that, I'd like to next introduce Saki Lemeki, who's the head of energy finance at Nedbank. Saki, can you tell us about some of the key projects that you're looking to get involved with and what sectors are on your radar?
Thank you. Nedbank, for those who don't know us, are definitely not the biggest bank in Africa. We're the fourth biggest bank in South Africa, or second smallest, depending how you want to see it. But we've got a very strong energy mandate, and currently in South Africa have a more than 50% share in the renewable program. So the renewable energy clearly speaks to our mandate. We are a green bank, and we have massive support from our board and investment committees to aggressively pursue renewable opportunities. That does not exclude any of the other technologies. So I can speak mainly to energy, but we of course offer the complete suite of investment opportunities in oil and gas, mining, infrastructure, telecoms, and then energy. So, and we definitely have an African mandate. It doesn't mean we'll do deals all over Africa, and I think that brings me to the point that I'd like to make. As a smaller bank with a smaller footprint in Africa, we have to, we're very aggressive in South Africa, but in the rest of Africa we're selective. So we try to follow reputable sponsors, proven technologies, and try to target the investment environments where the regulatory framework and the legal framework is such that it will facilitate private sector investment. Personally, we are of the opinion that private sector is very efficient in delivering power to Africa countries. They have proven that they can relieve pressure of a government where the private sector is prepared to take development, construction, procurement, and commissioning risk and operation and maintenance. And the only obligation that they put on government is to pay for the electrons that they generate. And that's the only thing that we look for is solid government support with all the other things combined to have a very successful IPP. And so Nedbank very keen to look at these projects in focusing on the countries where we have that kind of government support, where government identified that they want to pursue the IPP route.
Thank you, Saki. I think many of the points that you raised, we've heard throughout the day, particularly those around having transparent legal and regulatory frameworks, and I think that ties in nicely with some of the earlier comments we've heard about the IFC Scaling Solar program and how they're attempting to create a standardized framework. So,
maybe just important to highlight the topic is private sector. Just to flag that in the private sector, we see it as a combination, a team effort between developers, sponsors, equipment provider, and then the lender group plus their advisors. It's one big team to deliver. If you don't have your engine firing in all those cylinders, it won't work. If you don't play as a team, you may win the lineouts, but you will not score the tries. Or you may have good defenders, but not good strikers, and you will never see a goal. So if we don't play, and then people mentioned that all should be happy or equally unhappy, then you have a good project finance deal. So we play as a team.
Thank you. And with that, I'd like to turn to Abram Masango of ESCOM. Abram is the group executive of the Capital Division at ESCOM. And Abram, I'd like to ask you, similar to my question that I asked Longe, I'd like to ask you what projects that you're looking at in South Africa that you're seeking private developers and financiers to focus on.
Thank you. As you know, that ESCOM is still guided by the integrated resource plan that comes from the government. Out of that, there's still some projects that needs to be executed or implemented. One of them being the renewables, gas, biomass, and nuclear. If you look at the renewables, I think there's still a long way to go. My colleagues have spoken about renewables, but what is important on the renewables is that from the ESCOM's perspective is that the research and development, they still need to do a lot of work in terms of the storage, because most of the renewables projects are very handy and suitable during the day, but during the night, they disappear, which creates a lot of problem. As you know that most of our baseload plants is still coal, and it takes time to, to start a power plant to be able to instantly fit into the grid. So the challenge that we gonna experience in the future is that once we have renewables, during the day we're okay, and then during the evening peak, you need to replace them. Until the issue of the storage is sorted out, I think that is still going to remain a challenge. I think it's very critical that we keep that in mind. We hope that in the near future we'll have a viable technology that will be able to store the energy. In terms of the gas, from the ESCOM perspective, we're busy with the development because we feel very strong that we need to put gas. We right now developing the projects to the capacity of 2,500 to 3,000 megawatts. Parallel to that, we're investigating where the gas is going to come from. That development, as we speak right now, is carrying on. In actual fact, if you look at the renewables, gas comes in handy when those renewables are not available, because you can start those plants instantly and feed into the grid. In terms of the nuclear, I think it's been in the public for some time right now, but from the ESCOM side, as you know, that there was a cabinet resolution that says ESCOM is going to be the owner and the operator, and then it gives us the responsibility and the accountability of developing the sites. We're busy with the development of the sites, including the environment impact assessment. I think it's also a public information that we have submitted the EIA for one of the sites. So we'll carry on with the development of the nuclear. We also believe that nuclear, that's the way to go on a long term, because you need a base load plant to be able to keep the grid sustainable. But over and above that, one of the projects that are coming in the near future is the projects that will be coming from the transmission development plan. There's a lot of work that needs to be done from that point of view. One, we need to strengthen the current infrastructure, but over and above that, as you know, that we are also supplying electricity to some of the neighboring countries. So we feel that in the future we'll be supplying, because our view is that once Medupi, Kusile, and Ingula are delivered, we definitely going to have surplus. Right now, we're forecasting that in the next 4 years, in South Africa, we'll have surplus of electricity. So our view is that within the Southern Africa, the SADC, will be able to dispatch some of the electricity to a neighboring country, which will, spark the development of the transmission infrastructure. But we're not going to leave the issues of the N-1 compliance that addresses the grid code. It is also our view that the public-private partnership is going to remain the catalyst in South Africa to unlock some of the South African infrastructure development, as well as to unlock the economic growth. I think as parastatal, we feel very strong that those things will be achieved if we particularly partner and collaborate with the private sectors. And I think my colleague has also hit it on the head of the nail. One of the challenges that we've experienced in this mega project is that we did not collaborate from the beginning. It is very important that the public sectors collaborate with the private sector to the successful implementation and execution of these mega projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Abram. I think you raised a lot of very interesting points, some of which I hope we can discuss later today and during this panel, including the importance of thinking about energy storage, the transmission and distribution network, and also your comments on making a plan for potentially exporting power to the region. So thank you for that. And I'd like to next turn to Daniel Lalemand, the CEO of Kribi Terminal for Balore. And Daniel, my question for you is, first, congratulations on the success of the Kribi Terminal project. For those in the audience, the Kribi Terminal is a port located in Cameroon. And Daniel, can you tell us about some of the key sectors that you're looking into? And can you give us some more detail on the specific regions and countries of interest to you and your colleagues at Balore?
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon. Please, I'm French and not speaking very good English, and I will tell you exactly. What's about, I'm belonging to Balore Group since roughly 40 years, and our group is acting in Africa, 42 countries, and also in China, worldwide. Today we will talk shortly about the Kribi project. It's a credible project, it's an ambitious project that we won with, it's a consortium agreement with a Chinese company called CHEC. CHEC is a China Harbor Engineering company, and the owner CMA CGM. And we are the leader in this matter. Our group will oversee the management of the container terminal starting from September this year. An ambitious project, as I told you, that unfolds in two main steps. First of all, and already 300 meters quay dedicated to containers activity built and equipped during the phase 1. An additional 700-meter quay is to be built during phase 2 of the port development and completed within 4 years. The port of Kribi, it's located in the south of Cameroon. It's 400 kilometers far from Douala. It's a new port. Before it was a jungle. It's a good opportunity for everybody, for owners. The new port of Kribi represents a showcase project for Cameroon. It had a second platform existing dock and filled out Cameroon infrastructures network. Before it was Douala. But Kribi will, next time, and the next step will be the first one. It will underpin Kribi's role as an accelerator of growth in Cameroon and surrounding. The region and the entire country are set and see growth and development accelerate and take a new impetus. The cutting-edge infrastructure will help to drive development and serve as a logistic hub between the port and the region. The two regions are central of Africa by the corridor and Chad. Region, rail and road system. The authorities of Cameroon also see Kribi becoming a transshipment hub. What we can say, all our operations in Africa are in the same spirit. We run 17 ports in Africa. It's our business, and we control, let's say, most of part. We are the first in Africa in terms of logistics and in terms also ports. Any question?
Thank you, Daniel. And with that, I'm being told that we're running a little short on time, but we would like to have some question and answers for the panel. So does anyone in the audience have any questions that you'd like to ask the panelists?
Putting you on the spot in terms of the being in the group capital projects. In terms of the innovations that we're looking at, one of the projects, the pebble bed modular reactor, probably maybe one left behind, but is there any room, apart from the discussions and the debates that the nuclear debate is taking maybe for and against in South Africa, is there any room perhaps for that lovely innovation in pebble bed modular reactor technology?
Thank you. Yes, to answer you direct, there is a room. I think very soon we'll be talking about the PBMR. As you know that at some stage there were a lot of discussion around it, and then eventually the team that were researching the PBMR get dismantled. But we as EXCO, we have debated it lengthy, and we decided that the PBMR, we need to investigate it further. It will definitely in the near future come back. I think parallel to the nuclear development, we're gonna do PBMR as well. From the development point of view, we feel very strong that we shouldn't have stopped developing the PBMR, hence we brought it back, and you'll see it in the platforms very soon.
I think we have another question in the back.
Hi, it's Alex Caton from Infraco. Question to one of the panelists and from MBET. And it was just to ask, it sounds a very impressive and interesting list of PV projects you have in your portfolio, in your pipeline in Nigeria. And the question was simply, we've looked at several, and we continue to look at PV in Nigeria, but it would be interesting to understand how you see getting the best value for money from this long pipeline, the best value for money for your customer. What kind of process do you anticipate to bring those projects to market? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. When you look at Nigeria, before now, as far as say 2012, 2013, we actually had a policy that allows for unsolicited discussions where developers come to the country to develop their projects, and they have a one-on-one negotiations with the off-taker to arrive at a price. But the country is trying to move away from that. very soon we'll go into a competitive bidding. But the important thing is that we need to look for a way to, there's actually two different schools of thoughts here. The government is thinking of either they might want to do a form of closed bidding within this 15 project that we have now, or decide to agree on a tariff and close those deals. But definitely later in the year, there's a plan to go into competitive bidding, because that's really the best way for you to get the best price that the consumers will have the right value for. So just to reiterate, we're trying to go the way of South Africa. Hopefully, we'll get there.
Thanks, and I think we have one last question in the back over there.
Thank you so much. It's Pancho Ndabella here. I just have a question for the gentleman from Eskom, and probably Isaki can also step into this one. It's really around storage, which you raised, and in terms of what you guys are looking at. We today actually have viable storage opportunity or storage technology, which is basically from a renewable energy perspective, that is concentrated solar power. Concentrated solar power can provide energy for peaking power, for baseload power, as well as for mid-merit. And that's why there's a lot of the developments in the Northern Cape that are actually factoring on that. And what is simple does, it also means that you can put more into the grid, all the other renewables that are intermittent. So for me, the question that I have for you is that Eskom was looking at its own concentrated solar power, which was meant to operate as a base loader with about 12 hours of storage. Is that still on the cards, or that's not on the cards? And second part of the question is the fact that given what has happened to renewables in South Africa, and given the fact that, with concentrated solar power also there's an opportunity for industrialization and localization, is there room to actually see more of that? And the last part of my question deals with your transmission plans. Is that obviously there needs to be a way how your plans must move ahead of all the other projects that people are developing, because without the grid you can't evacuate anything. So my question to you is, what is Eskom doing to actually expedite the grid infrastructure sooner rather than later? Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think I'll go first before Saki. Yes, you're 100% right. The issue of the storage is still a viable option. Right now, in terms of the allocation from DOE, we are allocated as Eskom the concentrated solar power to install, but the affordability is an issue. The technology that is there is very expensive, and in our view, is that there still needs to be developed so that it becomes a viable option. We've been investigating it for some time right now. It's still in the cards, with the hope that from the research and development, we'll probably come up with a technology that will be viable. I think mainly the challenge is going to be the affordability right now, to be able to carry on with a current concentrated solar power technology that is currently proposed. And I think once we resolve the issue of the finance and cost and the affordability, then we can be able to expand on that. In terms of the transmission lines, you're 100% right. Hence, I've mentioned that in the near future, most of the projects that we'll be concentrating on is the transmission lines. But we're not only going to concentrate on the transmission lines, we're also going to concentrate on the distribution infrastructure, because some of the renewables gets connected to distribution lines as opposed to the transmission line. And it becomes very critical for us from the Eskom point of view to be up to speed, because at the end of the day, we need to know who has connected, who has not connected, so that we can be able to have a clear oversight in terms of how to manage that moving forward. So both the transmission and the distribution infrastructure needs to be looked at, And we've already started to map the way forward from the ESCOM point of view in terms of how we're going to deal with the transmission infrastructure as well as the distribution infrastructure. From the transmission infrastructure point of view, we also need to comply with the N-1 compliance, that is the grid code. So it's very important that we move very fast. But having said that, we haven't stopped. We've been installing and strengthening some of our lines. So we just need to intensify and move a bit faster. For example, for the past financial year, we have connected more than 345 kilometers of line. Some is strengthening, some is new lines. And this year we've got a target that we also need to meet. So it's a matter of us, intensifying and fast-tracking some of these projects.
Just quickly, the commercial bank IPP view on CSPs. We see CSP as a definite role to play. If they can dispatch during peak hours, you should compare the cost of CSP with peaking power cost. And if they then can dispatch during the day at normal PV, there's definitely an economic case for it to be made. Of course, you have to balance your grid and see what is your peaking requirements, because if you dispatch outside of those hours, then that CSP is expensive. But we can certainly refine that number. I foresee that CSP has a definite life in South Africa and a role to play. Furthermore, CSP stabilizes the grid. If we look at the Uppington area, for instance, where we have a lot of PV developments and now a few CSPs, Eskom can call on those CSPs and the storage whenever there's grid instability. If you have a sudden cloud moving in, I think CSPs can play a significant role in assisting grid stability.
Okay, thank you everyone. And I think we're out of time. So if you have more questions for the panelists, I encourage you to ask them during our next break. Thank you.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.